Okay, so today we are starting on lesson 3 of The Making of a Scientist. Section 1 has 5 lessons in it, so we are coming up to one of our first major tests here soon, and I will be giving you a study guide for that with a chance for some bonus points if you complete it and get it signed. So, for today, we are going to use what we know to answer a question based on the text, The Making of a Scientist. So, at first glance, it seems kind of like an easy lesson. Oh, well, we know how to answer questions. We've been answering questions since we were in kindergarten. Well, starting in 5th grade, we start to do something really specific with how we answer our questions. And the types of questions that we start to answer are called text based questions. So, just right off the bat, what do you think a text based question is? Just off the name. So, a text based question is a question that you need evidence from the text to answer. You have to have evidence from the text to answer a text based question. You can't answer it any other way. Your answer will not make sense any other way. Now, before in Ms. Bozeman's class, when you are answering a question like this, you would put the evidence from your text in your own words. Well, starting now in 5th grade, we actually start to quote directly from the text, which means we copy word for word what we want out of the text. And there is a specific way to do that. But before we get into that, let's talk about the steps of a text based question. There are 3 steps that we need to follow. The first one is pretty simple. You need to restate and answer your question, the same thing you've been doing your whole school career. Step number 2, you need to cite or choose your text evidence. That is where we will be quoting from our text. And then step number 3, our last step, is we need to explain that text evidence. Because if Joe Schmo off the street comes in and reads your answer, how is he going to know that you know what you're talking about? You have to prove it to him. So, with citing text evidence in 5th grade, there are some important things we need to remember. First of all, you need to let the reader know that you are about to reference the text. You cannot just throw some quotation marks in there and start talking from the text and expect the reader to understand what you're doing. You have to let the reader know you are referencing an article or a book. Also, you need to let the reader know what paragraph or page they will find the text. What if they want to go and check your work and make sure you know what you're talking about? You have to let them know where to find the information. And then finally, when we copy the text exactly, you always need to use quotation marks. This lets the reader know that you are not using your own words, you are actually using the words from somebody else. Now, this is the question that we are going to work on today. It says, in the final paragraph of The Making of a Scientist, Feynman says he was given something wonderful as a child. What did Feynman's father give him as a child? So for this, we need to go and we need to have our article and we need to have some way to answer the question. So I have our question right here. What did Feynman's father give him as a child? I have our text over here, The Making of a Scientist. The first thing that we need to do when answering a text-based question, step number 1, is always to restate and answer the question. Well, what does it mean to restate the question? Instead of asking a question, we're going to say that question again, but this time we are giving an answer. So, for example, if I ask you what your favorite color is, you might start off by saying, my favorite color is. That's what it means to restate. It's something you've been doing for a long time now. Don't think too hard about it. So, what did Feynman's father give him as a child? Feynman's father gave him, well, what did Feynman's father give him? We talked about 3 different examples from the text about the dinosaur, about the bird, and the wagon. And among those 3 examples, there was one thing that they all had in common. The main lesson that Feynman's father was trying to teach him was not the individual facts about each of those objects. He was trying to teach Feynman how to make observations about the world around him. So, what did Feynman's father give him? Feynman's father gave him the ability to make observations, right? Pretty simple. Same thing you've been used to. Now, this is where it gets kind of tricky, okay? You need to go back into the text now, and we need to cite our text evidence. So, the second step is to cite your text evidence, and we need to choose what example we're going to use from the text. So, a lot of people liked using the dinosaur, a lot of people liked using the bird. Nobody really chose the wagon story. Can't say I blame them. It's not my favorite either. So let's go with the bird. Okay, the bird story. So we're going to scroll down and we're not going to reread the whole thing. We're just going to scroll down to where the bird story starts. It says, "We used to go to the Catskill Mountains, a place where people from New York City would go in the summer." Now, we could spend time and reread that whole story all over again. But, I mean, the first little bit is just about Feynman talking to the little boy about the bird. We really don't need to read that again. We want to go to the meat of the story. And the meat of the story is when Feynman's father starts to talk about where he, why the birds are pecking at their feathers. Okay. So he said, for example, look, the bird pecks at its feathers all the time. See it walking around pecking at its feathers? Yeah. He said, why do you think birds peck at their feathers? I said, well, maybe they mess up their feathers when they fly, so they're pecking them in order to straighten them out. All right, he says, if that were the case, then they would peck a lot just after they've been flying. Then, after they've been on the ground a while, they wouldn't peck so much anymore. You know what I mean? Yeah, he says, let's look and see if they peck more just after they land. It wasn't hard to tell. There was not much difference between the birds that had been walking around a bit and those that had just landed. So I said, I give up. Why does a bird peck at its feathers? Because there are lice bothering it, he says. The lice eat flakes of protein that come off its feathers. He continued, each louse has some waxy stuff on its legs, and little mites eat that. The mites don't digest it perfectly, so they emit from their rear ends a sugar-like material in which bacteria grow. Finally, he sees, so you see, everywhere there's a source of food, there's some form of life that finds it. Now, I knew that it may not have been exactly a louse, that it might not be exactly true that a louse's legs have mites. That story was probably incorrect in detail, but what he was telling me was right in principle. So, I don't know about you, but I don't want to have to rewrite that whole story. That's a really long story to have to rewrite. And that is my dog squeaking her squeaker toy. So, if you go back to the text, we need to find just one or two sentences that we can use in our explanation. We don't want to have to write a whole lot. You don't want to have to write a whole lot. I don't want to have to read a whole lot. It's not fun for anybody. So, what portion really shows that Feynman is making observations? Okay. He says, let's look and see if they peck more just after they land. It wasn't hard to tell. There was not much difference between the birds that had been walking around a bit and those that had just landed. This is our meat. This is what we want. That shows exactly where Feynman and his father are making observations, okay? So now comes the hard part. Now we need to go through and we need to count our paragraphs to find where exactly that spot is so we can reference it in our text. So first, let's start our sentence so we're not getting completely lost. So we need to let the reader know where we're getting our information. Where are we getting our information from? The Making of a Scientist. Since this is an article and not a book, you are going to put quotation marks around it. So, in The Making of a Scientist, comma, and then when you put those quotation marks, in paragraph, now here's where we're going to have to count, okay? So we're going to go back up to the first page and we start counting. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. So in paragraph 19, okay? In paragraph 19, comma, it says, comma, there's a lot of commas in this sentence, okay? A lot of commas. It says, and then we're going to quote the text exactly. If it has a letter capitalized, you're going to capitalize it. If there's a piece of punctuation, you're going to include the punctuation. If a whole word is capitalized, you're going to capitalize the whole word. You copy it exactly. So we're going to put our quotation marks so the reader knows we're pulling from the text now. It wasn't hard to tell, colon, there was not much difference between the birds that had been walking around a bit and those that had just landed. Now that's the end of our quote. So we put our end quotes there. So now we're done with steps 1 and steps 2. We have our restate and answer our question. We have our text evidence. So the last step is we need to explain our text evidence, okay? Feynman's father gave him the ability to make observations. In The Making of a Scientist, in paragraph 19, it says it wasn't hard to tell. There was not much difference between the birds that had been walking around a bit and those that had just landed. Now, when we go to explain our text evidence, there are some sentence starters that we can use. This shows, this means, this is an example of. Any of those would be fine. And we'll go back over those again and again and again, so don't worry about it. I think for this particular answer, I'm going to go with this is an example of, because we are talking about a specific event in Feynman's life. We're not just talking about a big idea. So this is an example of, so who were we talking about? Feynman's father. Feynman's father, what was Feynman's father doing? Making Feynman observe, what was he observing? Birds to answer a question. Okay? So now you see we have all three parts. We have restated and answered our questions in the blue, we have cited our text evidence in the red, and we have explained our text evidence in the green. Now, in this answer, the longest part, the part that made us take the most amount of time, was citing our text evidence. That is the part that we are always going to be spending the most time on because it is important that we pull good text evidence. And just to be honest, it takes a while to get all that written. That's a lot, okay? Now, I know this looks super overwhelming, so I don't want you to worry about it because this is a skill that we're going to be practicing all year long. We're going to go over this again and again and again. I am just introducing it to you right now, okay? So, for your Google assignments, all right, this is going to show me that you actually watched this whole video and you didn't just skip ahead to it, okay? For your Google assignment, all I want you to do is pause the video and type what is in this blue sentence right here, okay? Just what's the blue sentence. So go ahead, pause the video, and then type the blue sentence. And then when you're done, you can exit out. So pause the video, go ahead and get started. I miss you, bud. I'll see you soon.